To that end, I have invited once again my good friend Dan Arel to the show. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for sitting through that.
I'm glad I did.
Thank you.
That was you. I couldn't have said it better myself.
I appreciate that. So you've written a couple of articles that I think are great about specifically the secular resistance to Trump. So given what we talk about on this podcast specifically, do you think there are people from a secular perspective? Do we need to throw in with the bigger fight, or do we have something unique to offer that may not be part of the broader conversation, do you think?
I think it's a little complicated. I think we need to be a part of the bigger fight because in reality, every issue we care about, every secular issue we care about is a broader issue because pretty much everything that's being attacked right now is a secular issue. I mean, we've already seen Trump sign, abortion restrictive laws that affect our overseas humanitarian work. That's a secular issue.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, that's the gag rule, basically saying that American funding doesn't go to organizations who even use the word abortion or talk about abortion as an option for reproductive health. Absolutely terrifying. It was something that, if memory serves, Bush started, and then Obama rolled back, and now Trump has reinstated. Is that right? I
think that's correct, off the top of my head. And then, even if you look at the Dakota Access Pipeline, it's hard to draw a church-state parallel there. It's not a quote-unquote everyday secular issue, but if secularism stands for anything, it's human rights.
Or should.
If we're not going to, or should, yeah. If it doesn't, we have a problem. And we literally have a water supply that is ready to be poisoned, and an entire nation of people who this is their land that we stole from them. And now we're stealing more of it. And we're saying that your lives aren't as important as this piece of pipe that we're going to put through here and, deal with it. And if we sit there and say as secular activists, oh, well, that's not really a secular issue, then what are we doing? So I don't think we can just say we have something unique, because the things that we have that are purely secular that we can tie a direct line to still apply at the national level. They're not things that just affect us. Because even freedom of and from religion affects others. And I wrote about that a while ago, that as secularists, we have a responsibility to stand up for Muslims, because if they lose their rights, we lose ours.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's not quite as, secular activism has areas where you can tie direct lines, but I think we can't be stuck in just saying like, oh, this is my cause is secularism. That's the broader aspect of it. That's the big umbrella that really does cover it all.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of times there's an aversion to wanting to kind of throw in our lot with people who, on other things we might have some disagreement with. And excuse me. And I'm not, I'm not a 100% ideological purist. Obviously, we have to draw a line somewhere. Even the Westboro Baptist Church hates Donald Trump. That doesn't mean I'm about to team up with him. But, I think that we may have to shed a little bit of our pride in organizing with, like with religious groups, for example, who have the same goals. The head of Americans United for separation of church and state is a Christian, and the fact that he's a Christian doesn't automatically make him not my partner, and so I think you're right, and I think the sort of the logical conclusion of that is that maybe we want to rethink our willingness to ally ourselves with groups who may not 100% share our goals, but I think it's hard to make this value judgment while we're in the middle of it here. It's hard because so many times people are told that you have to sacrifice the things that are important to you and unify for the greater good. And I bristle against that. Bill Maher called trans rights a boutique issue, and that we had to leave that behind to get Hillary Clinton elected. And I'm 100% not with that. But as an overarching concept, depending on where we decide to draw those lines, I don't know that that's an entirely invalid thing. Do you have thoughts on that?
My only thought is I agree with you. Well, that's no fun, but
right. I know. I've officially
but
turned the show into an echo chamber. I only have people on who agree with me. How horrible of me.
But you're right that because Bill Maher calls trans rights a boutique issue. Well, my brother posted yesterday on Facebook when Trump announced that he was going to sign the pipeline executive order, and a Trump supporter that he happens to know on his wall came and said this pipeline, and he basically said, is a boutique issue. He said this is like a pet issue. And I asked him if the lives of Native Americans was a pet issue. And he just kept doubling down on how it doesn't matter. It's just a pipeline. They can get over it. They can get water from somewhere else. They can move. This is a pet issue. That's what we're up against. Like, literal lives of people are now being considered pet issues.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I was at work the other day, and there's one guy who doesn't make a big secret of being a Trump supporter, and I try really hard to leave my political and social activism at home because work's not the place for that. I don't want to get threatened with losing my job or anything like that. I sometimes have strategic conversations, but I hear this guy going on for 20 or 30 minutes about all this stuff, and then at the end of the conversation, I shit you not, he goes, "But at the end of the day, this isn't really going to affect our lives any." And, I wanted to get up from my desk and strangle him. It's not going to affect you, and that's fine. And I think, that's what that's code for. When we call things a boutique issue, I think what that's code for is this doesn't affect me, so I don't have to care about it that much, so you shouldn't either. I think that's kind of what that's code for. So what I'd really like to do is talk about actual practical things. We can talk to death about philosophy and arguments and that kind of stuff, and that all of that is important. But I really would love folks to leave this episode with some very practical things that they can do to throw their hat into the resistance. So, Dan, I have this article up that you wrote that I think is great. And it's called 5 Things You Can Do to Resist Trump Now. And this is from December 12th. And if it's cool, I would just kind of like to go down the list and sort of get, expand on these because I think this is, obviously I don't think any single list is going to be 100% complete, but I think what's here is at the very least a really good start. So the first one is to join a social or political action movement. And I think this one is in some ways it's obvious and in some ways not, because I think that there are lots of people who think that joining a social or political action movement means that you're in the streets, and that's not necessarily the case. So do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Of course. So, social activism is such a broad scale, and joining these groups is just as broad. So you can join an action group that's going to go out in the streets and disrupt and do direct action, but that might not be for you. So don't feel like that's what it means you have to do. You can join one that does letter writing, does phone calls. These are all valid forms of activism, and they can be done in your home. You can just send emails all day, and a group will send you letters saying, this is the best thing to say, and this is what we're fighting, and guide you. And that's a social, activist sort of organization. You're doing something. Others are going to join really hardcore groups that are going to go out and they're going to organize protests and they're going to organize sit-ins, and they're going to kind of go over a lot of us don't really think letter writing's going to work. Some do, and I don't want to discourage anybody from letter writing or phone calls, because we still need to let our politicians know where we are. Even if they're not listening, they need to hear it. Well, yeah, and we need to keep saying it.
Well, yeah, I think that's something that gets discounted a lot, and I think there is value in a politician at least knowing that they don't have a mandate. And that's one of the arguments that I made and why I think the march is important, because I don't necessarily think that the march is going to necessarily lead directly to Trump taking a different action than he otherwise would have, or Congress taking a different action than he otherwise would have. But it steers the conversation. The news the next day was not so much about what Trump was doing, but what the entire world was doing against him. And he's notoriously thin-skinned. So we took him off message. We put a dent in the reality distortion field that he's universally loved by the American people, and that the American people are excited about this new regime that's coming to power. And that's valuable. It's hard because you don't necessarily see those things lead to direct progress, but they're all sort of chinks in the armor of that entire concept that, we're coming in with a strong mandate from the American people. And I think that's a really powerful thing that politicians need to know. And I do think that's useful.
Yeah. And I think, especially with this administration, I think protest is going to be even more effective than we're used to, just because he's so thin-skinned and reactionary. So you march on Washington, you have a big march. He can't just say like, wow, that's their democratic right. Or he has to go on the defense, because he has to seem like he's universally loved. And so every protest we have, every time we get under his skin like that, we're just going to drive him mad. And I think that's a good thing. I think we need to keep him never feeling like, oh, things are going well, people aren't protesting me. Now I can start doing these things I want to do, because everyone stopped paying attention. It's normalized now. This, what I am, is normal. And then he goes and does even more atrocious things.
Well, right. And I think, every second that he spends nursing his bruised ego is at least a second that he's not doing something terrible. And I mean, that's like small comfort, because obviously he's going to spend lots of time doing something terrible. But I mean, we already saw it happen. He watched those marches and protests on TV. There were 670 of them around the world, literally millions of people marching. And his reaction was to order his press secretary to hold a press conference where they whined about who was reporting the correct pictures of the attendance numbers. Like, it boggles my mind, because the people who supported this guy are the same people who like to yell and make fun of people about safe spaces and trigger warnings and being triggered. But it's like, I mean, this guy is the ultimate thin-skinned, like, triggered by everything snowflake. and I mean, we would be silly to not take advantage of that.
Oh yeah. I mean, we would, it's a wasted opportunity. We have to pounce. And just looking comparison, look at the protests against Obama. I mean, they literally walked with like characters of him hanging and telling him to go back to Africa and, communism and, like not in, like a Stalinist, like brutal dictator style communist is what they were comparing him to. And he, barely reacted at all. There was nothing. He didn't let it get to him. He continued on with his day job,
which is what a professional
does. Right. And he still spoke in a way that you knew he still understood he represented those people, and he still defended those people, the ones that were calling for him to be dead. He understood he was still the leader of the country that these people are a part of, and that he had a responsibility to them.
Yeah, and I mean, he even said that to plenty of times. He said, I have to understand that almost half of the country didn't vote for me, and I have to try to be their president too. And it's like, I mean, even if that's rhetoric, it's just, it makes me so sad.
But it's professional and it's political rhetoric that is important, because how quickly after Trump, what was it, New Year's, when Trump called us all his enemy?
Right.
The people that didn't vote for him are his enemies. They're not the people he represents. They're the people he needs to conquer. He sees, like, that's a difference in worldview that is just mind-boggling, because he thinks, I don't like to throw the word dictator around loosely, because he's not. We still have a government. But he acts so much like one. I mean, the way he speaks, the way he demeans the people that don't support him. And then the fact that now he's been in office for 5 days, and all he's doing is signing executive actions. Congress is basically rendered useless right now while he just does what he wants.
Yeah. And so just to give the names of some groups that If this is a thing that you want to do, if you want to get involved in a social or political action movement, there are lots of groups. Join Planned Parenthood, give to Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, Freedom from Religion Foundation, Americans United for Church-State Separation, Southern Poverty Law Center, Secular Coalition for America, the NAACP, NARAL Pro-Choice America, Socialist Party USA, Democratic Socialists of America, even your Democratic Party. There is still a lot of legitimate anger at the Democratic Party over the way the election went down. And I don't want to dismiss any of that because I'm still kind of angry about it too. I think a lot of the criticisms are a little hyperbolic. I think it shouldn't surprise anyone that the Democratic Party wanted the Democrat to win instead of the guy who joined the party just to run for president. But I do think that there is a level on which we have to acknowledge that we do want to work to sort of dismantle that system, but we are stuck with that system in the meantime. So there is value with trying to steer it in the right direction, I think. So even if you want to get involved in the actual Democratic Party and try and steer that for good, I think that's awesome. And I really want people to consider running for office. And this doesn't mean like try to go out and get, be a state legislator or anything like that, but like run for school board, run for city council, run to be the freaking dog catcher for your county. I think those things are all very important, even if you don't win, because whatever conversations happen around those actions can steer things in the right direction. Aaron Ra is running for Texas state legislature. I have zero faith that he's going to win, but I guarantee you that he will control the conversation. And that's valuable, and that's important, and that's a thing that we need to do. So that kind of leads us into the next one. Urge your state and local governments to reject Trumpism at all costs. And you use California as an example. Do you want to run with that?
Sure. So we even had, just recently, we did the State of the State address. And Jerry Brown, our governor here, has made it absolutely clear that whatever Trump does to set this country back, California will not follow. So mass deportations, we're not going to do it. And now I should say that with an asterisk because this country's already doing mass deportations. We need to be aware that already exists. We already have a pretty flawed and broken immigration system, and we're mass deporting people all the time. It just seems to go under the radar. But to escalate it is even worse, and California has said we will not be a part of that. Healthcare, we are fighting tooth and nail to make sure we can keep our healthcare system the way it is, because we have, for families that make under a certain amount of money, universal healthcare. So if you don't make over a certain threshold, you have healthcare here, and you walk into a doctor's office and they take care of you, and you never see a bill. And for most families, I say universal healthcare. It's not quite. You pay $14 a month for it. And if you can't afford $14 a month, you make solo, you don't pay anything for it. And
sounds like a socialist nightmare.
And the legislature here and the governor here have just stood up and said, we're not going to just let you roll us backwards. And we need to do that on every level, even if it's just your city. So if your mayor says we are going to be a sanctuary city for immigrants, and refugees, then uphold that. Make sure that you remain that way when he's up for re-election, or he's his elections he's done and someone else is being elected. Elect someone that's going to uphold that same principle. And sort of doubling back to point one real quick, you talked about all these great groups you can do. Well, if you're a Democrat and want to work with the Democrats, there are organizations that are Democratic that are working to install, far more liberal Democrats than the elitists that are there now. So, Working Family Party and even Democratic Socialists of America, they're not looking to overthrow the capitalists and install socialism. They're trying to install people like Bernie Sanders into the government. And you can do that locally and create safe havens. And then you welcome these people there. And you can open up, I could go on for hours and hours and hours about all the things we can do. But we can't like we talked earlier, we can't simply rely on the government. Phone calls and things are great, letting them know. But if you happen to live in a city or state where you have that sort of politician that doesn't want to just cower to Trump, be loud to them, because if they don't hear it, they may just start being, oh, well, you know what, maybe I should just do this and then do that, because no one's telling them not to. And if no one's telling them not to, they're just going to go and do what's the easiest or they might think is best. But if everyone calls and says, we are going to be a sanctuary city, don't remove that, and you have a democratic, person there, they're probably going to listen to you.
Well, right. And I think something that we focus a lot on the president and we focus a lot on Congress, obviously, because those are important things to focus on. But I think sometimes state legislatures get lost in the conversation, and that's vitally important. There are a couple of sort of anecdotes that I can provide about that. I mean, in Ohio, there was a legislator who had made it known that he was planning on writing a bathroom bill, and he thought that he had exceptions written into this bill that would protect trans people while making it harder for sexual assault to happen. And it was all bullshit. But this was the position that he was coming from. And he said that, he invited public comment from members of the trans community on this bill. So I sent him an email, smugly inviting him to coffee and expecting literally no response. And I got an email back 2 hours later saying, I'll buy, where do you want to meet? So I actually got a face-to-face with a state legislator. This is not a phone call or an email. I actually had a face-to-face talk with a person who makes Ohio state law. And the conversation was frustrating. I did not leave the conversation feeling super hopeful or like I had made a ton of difference. But he sat down and he had these conversations with lots of different people. Ohio has still yet to introduce a bathroom bill. And I don't claim to know that those face-to-face conversations are the reason that Ohio doesn't have a bathroom bill. I have to think that the horrible backlash against North Carolina probably has more to do with it. But I have a really hard time believing that those many face-to-face conversations where he heard people, members of the trans community, saying how hurtful these things would be and why these things won't work. I have a really hard time believing that wasn't at least a factor. So, maybe try it. I mean, obviously not everyone's comfortable doing this, and that's okay. I don't want to try and admonish you to do things that are going to be harmful to you emotionally and psychologically. But if this is a thing that you feel like you have the capacity to do, give it a shot. Shoot an email to your state reps and say, like, can we meet for lunch? I've got some shit I need to talk to you about.
I'm sorry. It did make a difference, because once people know someone, things change. Because what happens every single time a politician's and I'll talk even Republican, it happens to Democrats too, but every time a politician's kid comes out as gay, every time that politician suddenly, you know what? I think they should be able to get married.
Gay people are people after all.
But because it's so simple and it happens to all of us. So, let's not even, you don't have to focus on, homosexuality, but in so many cases, in so many things, if we don't know someone and can't connect, it doesn't resonate the same. And I think that's just a human flaw. That's not to say that people are just bad like that. But when you don't know someone that is trans, that is homosexual, you don't have that connection to the effect that things can have on them. We have a hard time, I think, a lot of times as people having empathy to things we just can't understand. I will never know what it's like to be you. I will never see the world through your eyes. I just won't. But by knowing you, hearing stories, and then hearing stories from other trans people about, the struggle and what other people's words and actions do, that makes a connection. And then when you sit down with somebody face to face and you hear it and you look in their eyes, you see their face, you can no longer pretend like it's not actually something. It is now in your face. It exists and you have to acknowledge it. And if you're empathetic or kind, even in the slightest, you can't ignore that. And
I agree.
I think that face-to-face and the others that happened put a face to what he was doing. And I think once you have that, the bill probably, that was a factor. It had to be, because otherwise they could have done changes to say, look, we're not the North Carolina bill. We're not because we're going to do this differently. But once there's a face to it, then the mindset changes. And if he came out and said that had nothing to do with it, I would be shocked.
Yeah, I agree. And so the next point is go beyond the safety pin and stand up to Nazis and bigots every day. And this was another shit fight, right? When the whole safety pin thing was happening, and I think that was a lot of times sort of another case of people who actually experienced that kind of violence and marginalization. Their voices were being ignored in favor of people saying like, well, look how good of an ally I am. Why are you criticizing me? And, when people were simply just saying like this is cool, like it's a good sign of solidarity, but you have to actually take action for it to mean anything. And, so again, I think this is an important thing to do. And, I don't want to turn this into like a 2-hour conversation about punching Nazis, because I've had so much of that. But so one of my favorite things that I've seen is this video of Shia LaBeouf just screaming in the face of this neo-Nazi guy, and eventually he leaves. And I think that was awesome. So do you want to kind of expand on that a little bit?
Of course. So the first point I have to go back and circle back to is that I hate the ally card. It's not. There's a reason I don't have a card in my wallet that says I'm an ally. The only time I ever use the word and say I'm an ally is if I'm going to make a statement about LGBTQ rights, and I think it's important to be known that it's not affecting me, so that I want to make it clear that I'm not speaking for myself. And so I'll say like, I'm only an ally, and I'm saying this, and that way I'm prefacing to not make people think that, I understand because, it's affecting him. It's not. It's affecting people I love. It's affecting people I don't know that I care about. I don't think it's a card to come out and say, you can't say I was wrong about X because I'm an ally. We have to be careful of that. I think the word, in a sense, just is too muddied now. But there's no card. You're only an ally the fact that you care. But allies aren't perfect ever. We still make mistakes and we still learn. Allies misgender. Allies do. We mess up still. We learn. We move on. But the safety pin, wonderful act of solidarity. But I wonder how many people are going to have a safety pin on, see something going down, and then be like, oh, I don't want this to escalate, and don't stand up. So it has to be twofold. You have to, if you're going to wear that safety pin, you have to mean it. It has to be, I am going to be there to defend you. That's what the safety pin is. It isn't just a nice little thing to wear so people look over and go, oh, that guy cares. That person, they're just so kind. And then when trouble strikes, they run the other way. Like, we have to stand up and fight. And when I say fight, I mean that. From Shia LaBeouf, I can never say his name, screaming in a Nazi's face to, a Antifa member punching a Nazi. Like, there's varying degrees.
Right.
And let's not go down that road for too far. But because there are plenty and a myriad of nonviolent ways of dealing with Nazis.
Well, I agree, and that's one thing that I've not seen a ton of conversation about that I think is vitally important is, there are organizations that do classes and train people on nonviolent bystander intervention. When you see something's about to go down, somebody's about to get hurt, there are ways that you can step in and intervene that don't involve violence and don't involve escalating violence. And I think those are things that you need to be trained on. I don't think that's a thing that you can read an article about and feel ready for. But, we don't have to advocate literally going out and committing acts of violence to prevent acts of violence. That's not a thing that's necessary. So, if this is a thing that you're interested in doing, I would absolutely look into, just Google the phrase nonviolent bystander intervention training. I know there's an organization called Green Dot that does it. They have a local chapter here, and if my understanding is correct, they have chapters nationally, and they do bystander intervention training. And it's really simple, practical stuff: redirecting a conversation, taking the attention away, deflecting, derailing, those kinds of things. It's all vital. It's all important. And if you're gonna visibly identify yourself in that way, I think those are things that you legitimately need to be able, to be willing to do. Be willing to go to the bathroom with a trans person. Be willing to step in if somebody's yelling and screaming at somebody. Be willing to redirect the conversation, to step up and just be present. One of the things I tell this story, I've told this story probably 2 or 3 times. I'm going to tell it again. I'm sorry if you're tired of it by now. But after a convention in Nashville, we were at a McDonald's, my girlfriend and I. We were looking at the menu trying to figure out what to eat, and this guy behind us was saying all kinds of awful things that we couldn't hear. And I just noticed that our friends around us, Bobby and Ashley and Human and the whole No Religion Required crew, I just noticed that they were sort of surrounding us. They didn't say anything. I just noticed, like, wow, they're like inching really close to us. I don't know what the deal is. Maybe they're just really hungry too, trying to get closer to the food counter. But I realized later that they were visibly placing themselves in between us and the person who had the potential to hurt us. They didn't have to turn around and yell at the guy. They didn't have to hit the guy, but they were physically in between us, making themselves a barrier, making that person understand that this is not going to go unchallenged. And obviously all of those things carry risk. It's a very important thing to consider. It's not something to take lightly, but it's something that I think is vitally important. So it's something I would encourage everyone to look into. Oh,
absolutely. I think that's perfect because, one thing I've tried my best to keep conveying during the entire debate we're having about Nazi punching is that if you're a nonviolent activist and you want to stay a nonviolent activist, please do so. We that's necessary. We don't, even if you're a activist that is okay with punching Nazis if we need to, the nonviolent activists and the nonviolent activism, even of pro-violence activists, or I don't want to say pro, but I think the point's there, is nonviolence always comes first, every time. We should always think nonviolence first. So if they can make that wall to protect you, that's awesome. But I bet if those people would have come with fist throwing, they wouldn't have said, let's hug. You know what I mean? But that is a lot different than sucker punching a Nazi on the street. That is, physical violence coming at you. But nonviolence is always great. But when we look at it, Gandhi advocated for nonviolence, but understood that when it was time, you stepped up. And that's the key point here is I don't think if you're going to, wearing the safety pin, saying that you're going to do this doesn't mean that you have to be willing to step in front and throw the punch. It means you have to be willing to step in front. And then if it escalates, you have to be ready to defend that person and yourself. And if you can't, if you physically say like, look, I see it happening, but I can't get in front of it and I can't take that risk to myself. I'm not, physically or mentally or whatever it is strong enough to get there, then don't kind of present yourself that you're going to be. Know your limitations, know where you are. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person or that you aren't an ally if you can't get in and throw a fist. Some people just aren't there for that. They just can't do it. And that's respectable. And everyone is different in where they are. Just know what your limitations are and then make sure you're presenting those honestly so that people don't think, oh, that's, what if you're in a grocery store and you have a safety pin on and a Muslim woman is shopping and someone starts coming up and harassing them and they turn and see you and they're like, oh my God, and they go right to you and then you're like, oh, whoa, get away. Like, I can't deal with this right now. Like, I'm not, what's that do? So know your limitations, know what you can do and get involved at the degree that you're comfortable and willing. And I think your idea of taking that kind of training course is amazing because that's what we need. We need to understand how to step in front of these things and de-escalate them and get that person out of there and make sure that is over, it's done. and no one had to get hurt. Everyone walked away, and it's done. It's over.
I agree. And the next point is one that I don't know that necessarily needs a protracted discussion, but donate to groups that will likely suffer or need massive funding. And I think this is something that's huge. And obviously, the communities of folks that we're talking largely to and about are not people who have tons of money to give. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that. I don't want to admonish people like, well, go without dinner tonight because Planned Parenthood needs your money. Like, I definitely don't want to come off as if we're advocating for that kind of thing. But I do think that, some belt tightening may be necessary. I mean, I've done it. I buy cheaper things at the grocery store. So I've got $10 to give to the ACLU, those kinds of things. And I don't, I try to be so careful to not be prescriptive and tell people what they should be doing, aside from the fact that you should be doing whatever you're capable of and whatever you're comfortable with and whatever you're comfortable with as far as extending, risks to yourself and safety to yourself. So, I just think it's important to keep in mind that, especially, groups like the ACLU, this Congress and this president are going to continually do things that test the limits of what is legal and blow right through the limits of what is legal. The ACLU is going to be working overtime 24/7 for the next 4 years, working on these things. They need support. The Southern Poverty Law Center, I have a big problem with them characterizing people like Majid Nawaz as anti-Muslim, hate speech activists. But that doesn't mean that they don't do other important work. Obviously, Freedom from Religion Foundation, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, those kinds of organizations, and also your local organizations. I think that's another thing that is often lost in the conversation when we talk about groups like the ACLU and FFRF, and those are big national organizations that do very big and very important work. But I guarantee you, wherever you are, there are local organizations that are doing important work as well. Boots on the ground, getting, connecting people in need with services and those kinds of things. And those things are all vital. So the only prescriptive statement that I want to make is that we should all be considering things that we can do to help financially if it's a thing that's possible. Obviously, not everyone is in a position to do so, and that's okay. But I do think it's something to consider.
Yeah, and you know what? If you can't give money, which so many people can't, and that is okay. Like you said, never feel bad because you have to put eating over donating money, ever. Like, you come first. Your health, your well-being has to come first. But if you can't give money, consider if you can, and figure out if you can give time. Can you go volunteer and be an escort at a Planned Parenthood to help walk people in? Can you, give a couple minutes to send emails to these organizations to let them know what's happening in your community that they need to be aware of? Those are helpful. So it's, giving money is awesome, but not everyone can do it. So there are other ways of donating your time, your effort. Also, I'm going to say it. People work multiple jobs. They have kids. They have no money. Even volunteering is out of the question. It's just impossible sometimes. Share the link to donate, because you might have a friend that can donate. And if you're even doing that and then they donate $10, you help get that organization $10 that they may not have donated before. So don't ever feel like you can't do something because you don't have time and or money. You can still contribute in a myriad of ways. And so just finding those ways, even if it's 1 minute a month that you've taken to share a link, thank you. You've helped. You've spread the message.
Yeah. And even just having the conversations. I see that kind of on the same level as giving your time. If your mom is saying something terrible and you stand up to her, and you may not change her mind, but you at the very least reminded her that her views aren't universal, and that what she's saying is not popular, and that it's not normal to think that way. And I think that I consider that giving time to the cause and volunteering too. So I think that's vitally important as well.
I have an important story about that, and I'll try to keep it short. But
you're fine.
My dad, I would never ever label him as a racist or a bigot or anything like that, because he's a kind, loving, gentle person. Always has been. But he used to use language that was unbecoming of a person of that type. So if you were to talk to him sometimes, you'd be like, he's none of the things you just described to me. And I can remember some uncomfortable situations with being at a restaurant here in San Diego. There's Hillcrest is our LGBTQ neighborhood. That's what they're known for here. That's where our Pride March is. That's where the festival is. And we were at a restaurant there, and the waiter was very flamboyant, just fun. The restaurant was known for this kind of atmosphere, and it made him physically uncomfortable. And you can see, even though he wouldn't say a word, you can read physical uncomfortableness on people. You can see it in their face.
Oh yeah.
He would say things like, "I have no problem with gay people loving each other. I just don't want to see them kissing in the street." Well, that sounds innocent, but it's not. It's problematic. Right. So he would use language like that and say things like that were an issue. And I kept talking to him about it and kept correcting him and kept, being on it. And one day he posted on Facebook an apology to anyone he'd ever said something to like that or heard something like that, because he knew it was wrong. And he had been shown it was wrong, and he felt bad that he had done it, and said, I'm going to make a massive effort to not do it anymore. And it doesn't mean he's perfect and doesn't slip back, but it means he's trying. And he has acknowledged that there was a problem that is now being fixed. And if I would have just said, oh, that's my dad, he might not have gotten there. But instead,
right.
I said, I know my dad doesn't feel this way. I know he's just doesn't understand the weight what he's doing carries. And I applaud him for that, for making that statement. And I guarantee he's going to listen to this episode. So, Dad, I love you. I think you're doing an awesome job. But
well, yeah, and I think, I think it's important that, we acknowledge it's not easy to change your mind and admit that you were wrong. It should be, but it's not. And I think it's worth acknowledging when people do that. I think that's awesome. And Dan's dad, if you're listening, I love you too, and thank you.
Yeah, that's my story, and I think that just shows that you can do it, and it doesn't have to be massive scale. You don't have to go stand on a podium and change 1,000 people's minds. You can change one person's mind and help better the world.
Right, because a changed mind equals changed behavior.
Right.
Now that someone thinks that way, they're then going to act that way. They're going to vote that way. Importantly, so yeah, vitally important. And then the final point is take to the streets. And, the conversation around just protesting in general is one that I often find myself really frustrated during. And the reason for that is I think that, in my opening rant, when I was really angry, I said that I think liberals often have this sort of insatiable fetish for discourse at all costs. And that we sort of sometimes value this sort of peace that at least we experience. We know other people aren't experiencing it over the fight for justice. And so I don't think I've ever heard anyone actually condemn, peaceful and unobtrusive protests. But on one hand, I see people also saying that they're pointless. And it's well, they're pointless because they're peaceful and unobtrusive. If you're just standing on the corner with a microphone shouting about what you think, I'm not sure that there is a ton of use in that, because at that point you're a street preacher just preaching the correct things. I don't know that you're going to change minds or accomplish things with that. And if we look all throughout our history, when it comes to change, good or bad, generally speaking, there have been some sort of, civil disruption or civil disobedience. Part of what led to women, white women at least, getting the right to vote was people crashing a presidential inauguration. The right wing of the Republican Party, the Tea Party, they're named after an act of property destruction. So I think I'm like 99% there, and that we should not be the ones to punch first. But I also see a lot of dismissiveness and condescension around things like Dan was talking about earlier, like sit-ins, or shutting streets down, or massive showing up to a city council meeting and not letting them get about their business until they address the things that you want to say, those kinds of things. And look, I can't remember ever hearing about a time where there was, well, and you know what, maybe that's wrong, because I can. There are ex-Nazis, there are ex-KKK members who have been convinced that those things were wrong by brave people going into those organizations and working their way out. So I started off that statement wrong. Those things do happen, and those things do exist, and I think those things are important. But I think what we also need to remember is that in the meantime, there are people still being hurt, and there are people still being killed. And at a certain point, we have to realize that on a systemic level, those conversations aren't stemming the tide, and that at some point we need to actively oppose these people and make them hesitate and make them even afraid. And I don't necessarily mean afraid in the sense that they're afraid they're going to walk out on the street and be hurt or killed. But I mean afraid of what it's going to cost them socially, afraid of what it's going to cost them politically. And I don't think we can do that with polite conversation. I think at the very least we need to be advocating for nonviolent civil disobedience, sit-ins, civil disruption, that kind of stuff. I mean, even the marches around the country, they were sort of disruptive, but I mean, they all had permits. Everyone knew it was coming. Everyone expected it. I'm sure plenty of people were inconvenienced, but I don't know that I would necessarily consider that disruptive. So I think it's important that we consider those kinds of action, and that we leave behind our need for a lack of conflict in the absence of justice. So I just did a really long rant there, David.
And you've hit so many points that I could spend days agreeing with and talking about, because, okay, Google a picture of Chicago at the Women's March. Count the streets that are completely shut down. Now Google a single, any city, Black Lives Matter protest, and count the one street that was closed down. Which march had a headline complaining about streets being closed?
Exactly. And
so first, and this is a problem with, and I'm going to use the broad term liberalism here. I'm not, I don't want listeners to think I'm painting a broad brush. I'm just going to use the term, even if I'm talking about a narrow section of liberals that, are the, don't disrupt them. Don't cause any damage. When 2 windows were broken in DC, my Twitter and Facebook exploded with, don't break windows. Windows. I'm talking literal inanimate objects that can't feel pain are being just sobbed about. Like, don't break windows. But you have to take a step back and understand that in a society, and I'm stealing this from a Twitter that I saw, a society that values a person's worth on property, a window is going to get smashed. Because it's just, that is a voice of the unheard being heard. It wasn't a mom and pop shop window that was broken. It was a Starbucks and a CVS. That was intentional. Starbucks and CVS are not going to suffer because of a broken window. But you've got these people on the streets that are disenfranchised, that are feeling left out, they're unheard, because they're not valued in a society because they don't own what these people own. They're not heard because they don't have money and power. So of course the window's going to get smashed. And you can say like, I don't think that's the best way to protest. I like, this or that. But don't vilify it to the point that you're standing next to the people on the right saying you're not helping, because by saying that, you're not helping these people that are saying, listen to us, someone pay attention. People get so mad when Black Lives Matter protests get rowdy, or a window gets broken, or a car gets torched. If that doesn't happen, we don't listen as a society. Our news media doesn't show up. We don't care. But when something like that happens, we show up. Oh, wait, what's happening? Let's get over there. Ryan Bell tweeted this so many times. A riot is the voice of the unheard. And back to your broad point, we don't have to necessarily riot. Nonviolent civil disobedience also is an option, but we are consistently battling this liberal mindset that we shouldn't do that we should just have this permit approved protest that's going to go down the street, take a left here, take a right here. Cops are lined up along the way to protect us. And then as you walk by each cop, you say, thank you for being here, which I saw throughout the entire Women's March in San Diego. The group next to me
I saw it in DC too.
Wouldn't stop saying thanks and getting pictures with them. If this wasn't a march that was primarily white women, I don't think it would have gone that way. The cops, because the cops were not there because they wanted, not because they wanted to be to protect these people. They were assigned that shift. So I understand they're there to protect, and they probably would have done their job if someone tried to get out of hand. So I'm not trying to say the cops are just useless, but it's not like they were there to say, like, I'm here to protect you because you need it. They were told their name was on a list, and they showed up. And they stood there and did their job. But if those same cops were assigned that same shift and a Black Lives Matter walk down there, they would have been in riot gear, and they would have been much more aggressive. And
it would have been an entirely different mindset. I mean, They would have gone in expecting a fight.
Right. And
when there wasn't necessarily a reason to think that there would be one.
Exactly. And that's a huge problem. That's a massive issue. And until the liberal mindset gets over that and realizes that they can march down the street like that uninterrupted and disrupt the streets and disrupt city lives, and everyone goes, it's one day. It's one thing. I can wait an extra 10 minutes to cross the street. And then that same thing happens with not even a quarter of the same amount of protesters, because the people that show up for the Women's March aren't showing up for Black Lives Matter marches. Then their life is completely upended because they had to wait 5 minutes to cross the road. And it's a big deal. And why can't they be more peaceful? Why can't they protest on the sidewalk? Like, we have to change this entire mindset. And so much of that comes from the liberal side of things. And that's what's so disheartening.
And I hate so much that happens, because, like, obviously, like, when people like you and I bring up these issues, we're immediately told that we're being divisive and that we're splitting our team up. And, just like I have to have these conversations, someone else being an atheist does not necessarily mean they're on my team. Someone else calling themselves a liberal does not necessarily mean that they're on my team. I hope they are. I wish they are. But that doesn't necessarily mean that. If your first priority is comfort, you're probably not going to be necessarily on my team. So I think that we also need to get past the idea that we should never have these internal conversations and these internal arguments with each other about being inclusive, about the things that we're doing to make sure that trans people are included, make sure that people of color are included, make sure that people with disabilities are included, and Native people, and so on. If one of those groups comes to us and says, hey, you're doing this thing and it makes me feel excluded because X, the proper response is not to, sorry, you have to sublimate your interests for the greater good, because I don't really care, is oftentimes what it comes down to. The proper response is to listen and to adjust. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that just because someone comes to you and says this thing that you automatically have to agree and that you automatically have to take them as the dictator and the person who hands down all of the, quote, like, correct social, political action. I'm not saying that, but I do think it's important that those of us who are allies to those communities understand that we often lack that perspective, and that we understand where our blind spots are, and that we make an effort, an honest effort, to fill those with knowledge from people who know better than us. And an honest effort to do that, I don't think is splitting up the team or being unnecessarily divisive, or, letting the conservatives win, So I want to admonish everyone to be more mindful of those things. And in closing, I kind of, there was another sort of rant / speech thing that I was originally going to open this episode with, when it was going to be sort of this fluff piece about the march and about how amazing this thing was. And using the word fluff piece makes it sound dismissive, and I don't mean it to. I don't mean to dismiss or demean the significance of millions of people around the world marching in solidarity for a goal. I don't want to demean that. But I think it's important that we also remember, and I've made this rant several times on the show, but I don't think it can be said enough, in that for many of us, your continued existence is resistance. And that waking up in the morning and existing is a slap in the face to all of the people that we're fighting against. When we take action that improves our health or preserves our health, we're fighting back. When we decide to love our partners publicly and unapologetically, we're fighting them. When we build families and we build careers and we become valued members of our community, we're fighting back. When we step away from the movement to take care of ourselves because we're not in the right headspace emotionally, we're fighting back. When we stop engaging because we can't handle it, because we don't want to burn out, we're fighting back. So at the very least, even if these entire 5 points, even if you don't have the capacity to do literally any of this, because I know that some people don't, people who have disabilities, people who struggle with mental illness, some of these things are not an option. And I understand that. And for those folks also, your continued existence, your fight for your own health, for your own physical and emotional well-being, your fight to be okay and to exist, that's also fighting back. And that's vitally important. And that's something that I have to keep in mind day to day when I'm feeling powerless, when my Facebook feed is exploding and no one seems to want to listen to each other. That's what I remember. What I remember is going bed next to my girlfriend each night, looking over at her and smiling because I love her so much. And our relationship is a slap in the face. The fact that we can get married is a slap in the face. The fact that we might one day start a family is a slap in the face. The fact that we go to the grocery store, I see somebody wearing one of those stupid ass red hats that say "Make America Great Again," and I look that person dead in the eye, then turn around and kiss my girlfriend and grab her hand. That's fighting back. And if nothing else, we can try to do that every single day, and that's resistance too. So, Dan, did you have anything to add before we go?
That I promise that until my last breath, I will fight until your existence doesn't have to be fucking resistance. Because I'm getting actually a little teared up because that was, it makes me really upset to think that you have to exist as a person as resistance, that your existence is controversial to somebody. Like, that infuriates me, that's the society we live in. Like, I was riled up earlier in this episode because, it's the topics we're talking about, but I don't know if I have the words I can't imagine that. I can't, because my existence is the everyday white cis male existence. Everything I do is, as walking down the street with my wife and my kids, is not resistance. It's normal. It's accepted. And I'm sad and infuriated that even has to be said, that simply existing as a person is a revolutionary act. And I will fight to my last breath to make sure that someday that's not the case, and that you don't have to go out and be looked at sideways or ever feel unsafe, because that's not the society we need to be living in. And
I think it's an important reminder to know that I mean, that's really what we're fighting against. We're not fighting against these academic and political ideals that exist in a vacuum. I mean, what we're fighting for is the right of people to continue to exist without hindrance, and the right of people to determine the course of their own lives and to continue living. And a lot of times people get dismissed as being just angry. You're just angry and you want to lash out because you're immature, or because you want to stand on a soapbox. And sure, you know what? There are probably people who are like that. I get it. I don't have any argument that those people exist. But I think it's important to remember that for most of us who do this, though, we get angry, we get frustrated, we lash out, we argue, and sometimes, frankly, we go too far. Sometimes we do yell at people who may not necessarily deserve to be yelled at. Sometimes we get shitty with people who may not necessarily deserve it because we misinterpret a thing that they say in the heat of the moment when we're emotional. And we need to own up to those things. And we need to make sure that we mend those fences where those fences can be mended. But I think what's important to be reminded of is that at the core of everything that we do is love. And I don't mean love in the sense of that, like the platitude, like love trumps hate, love trumps hate. What I mean is a radical love for people, and a need to see people thrive, and a need to see people be okay, and to see people be taken care of, and to see people flourish. That's what's at the core of everything that I do, at the core of everything that Dan does, and at the core of everything that most of us activists do. And I think a lot of times it's easy to lose sight of that because we get caught up in the moving parts. We get caught up in the protest. We get caught up in the laws that we're passing, and I think a lot of times we forget that that's the core of our action, and that's where we always need to measure. That's the litmus test that we always need to measure our actions against. And sometimes we're going to make mistakes. Sometimes we're going to go too far. And like I said, we do need to own up to those things, and we need to apologize for those things. I'm sure Dan and I have both done plenty of that, or tried, and I think those things are important to do. But that's what's at the core of everything that we do. It sounds like a cheesy ass Tony Robbins speech, but a long time ago, I gave myself a personal mission statement, and that is very simply that I want hurt people to stop hurting. And I try very hard to measure all of my actions against that personal mission statement. Is what I'm doing contributing to the well-being of others, especially people who are in vulnerable positions in society? I'm constantly asking myself that question. I have failed to live up to that several times, and everyone will always fail up to live to their ideals sometimes, and that's okay. But keeping in mind what's at the core of what we do is vitally important, and I hope, if nothing else is taken away from this episode, it's that. That, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Atheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. I want to thank everyone who made it to the end. I know, the opening rant may be a little hard. These last couple of minutes may have been hard to listen to. But I really hope that wherever you're coming from, that you got something out of this. Whether it's encouragement, whether it's a reality check, whether it's thoughtfulness and mindfulness. I hope we got something out of it. And Dan, thank you for everything that you do, for your insight, for your perspective. I appreciate you taking the time. I know this, this kind of thing is obviously not super easy for you either, given the conversation we just had. So I definitely appreciate you.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for doing everything you do.
And you can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCali, and you can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. And Ari will obviously be back with us next week. I had planned for this episode to be nothing but stuff from the march, and they weren't able to attend, so it kind of made sense. Plus, we're recording this on Wednesday because I just didn't know what to do until now. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/thegatheistmanifesto and make a per episode donation to help us out. As said before, if that's not something that's doable, I totally understand. You can head over to iTunes, give us a 5-star rating. That's very helpful as well. And I want to thank Mark and Michael this week for joining our family on Patreon. We appreciate you, and you help make it possible for us to do what we do. So I very, very much appreciate that. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gay Theist Manifesto.